We are the wealth generation.
We're full of life.
Full of vibes.
And we have a lot of ambition. We don't speak of lack.
Nah, forget about that.
We know the life that we want, and we're not afraid to go after it.
Even if we have to build it from scratch.
Life looks different now. This generation does things our way.
We are the wealth generation.
And Scotia Investments, they get that.
Start your wealth building journey today with a lower opening amount in a mutual fund or unit trust product and more affordable contributions.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Budget. I'm Sharon K. Stewart, Senior Manager, Business Analytics, Strategy and Portfolio Advisory at Scotia Investments. Earlier this week, the Minister addressed the nation where he provided the details of the budget for the fiscal year 24-25, as well as the approaches to financing the budget and some key policy changes. Now, given the importance of what he discussed, we believe it's important for us to take a closer look at the budget. And we'll be doing just that today, highlighting some of those key takeaways and what it means for all of us. Joining me today to have this discussion are Dr. Christine Clark, Senior Economist at the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Kamara Barrett, Senior Financial Analyst at Scotia Investments, and Keenan Faulkner, Policy Analyst at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Before we start, I'll run through quick housekeeping matters and explain the flow of today's session. We will start today's proceedings with a presentation from Kamara, who will set the context for our conversation today, where she'll focus on the recent fiscal performance of the government. Next, we'll have a conversation around the key issues arising out of the budget, and afterwards, we'll take your questions. Kamara, over to you.
Over the last few months, we have seen where the big three credit rating agencies, i.e. S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, upgraded Jamaica's issuer default rating, more commonly known as the credit rating. The most recent announcement came from Fitch and was shared publicly last week. Now, in addition to upgrading Jamaica's credit rating, Fitch also maintained a positive outlook, which suggests that it's extremely bullish on the country's near-term economic and fiscal performance. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this data and use that as a springboard to frame our conversation for this evening. Now, prior to the onset of the pandemic, Jamaica's GDP grew by around 0.5% to 2%. However, we are a tourism-dependent economy, and once the pandemic hit, there was a sharp contraction in GDP. Notably, during the June 2020 quarter, which was the period associated with the most severe lockdowns, output fell by over 18%. But once the access to international vaccines started to roll out, we saw where the pent-up demand for travel could actually be realized. And with it, we saw a V-shaped recovery in the economy. Now, this type of recovery was mirrored in the fiscal accounts, where we're seeing a similar V-shape. However, as economic conditions start to return to the pre-COVID normal, we're seeing a tapering, which raises a question around the sustainability of the fiscal accounts moving forward. This is particularly important when we look at the fiscal data for the period fiscal year to January 2024, where we see that the government of Jamaica posted a deficit of over 13 billion. And this is the largest deficit since fiscal year 2021, which was the COVID period. Now, this also makes us wonder whether or not the GOJ will attain a fiscal balance moving forward. Our track record suggests that, yes, this is possible. It's possible for three main reasons. The first is, in the pre-pandemic period, we would have established a track record of meeting fiscal surpluses. The second reason why this is possible is, on the domestic side, there is a fiscal responsibility law which mandates that the government keeps the budget in a very tight balance, most of which is a surplus. So on the domestic side, we have guardrails to prevent us from going off track. But on the external side, we also have guardrails as well in the form of the current IMF agreement, which mandates that we meet a fiscal surplus. Now, the government's capacity to meet a fiscal surplus also has positive implications for the debt to GDP outlook. The Minister of Finance would have recently shared with the public that it seems that we're converging to our targets a little bit faster. The forecast, this is for two reasons. The forecast is for GDP to grow a little bit higher than our pre-pandemic normal, with the expected range between 1.6% to about 2.6%. Now, the other reason is the GOJ is actively conducting liability management exercises, which allows them, again, that buffer to pay down the debt much faster. In the end, in the long run, this gives them the fiscal space to make investments in social and infrastructural projects, such as healthcare and roads, thereby laying the foundation for sustainable long-term growth. So we are definitely in agreement with Fitch on the outlook for Jamaica over the next 12 months.
Thank you, Kimara. You have laid the firm foundation for the discussion we plan to have today. And I wanted to start off with the revenue measures that the minister spoke to on Tuesday, particularly as it seems, I believe that it's arguably the most topical matter that came out of the presentation. And there are some who think that given what you described earlier about the track record of the government and the fact that we're on a good path in terms of growth, there may be more room to accommodate a more ambitious move in terms of the tax policy. Keenan, I just want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? I mean, having heard the minister, in terms of is it appropriate what the minister has done at this time, and later I want to hear from you, Christine, as to whether there is more room based on what Kimara spoke about in terms of the growth path.
Yeah, so I think most of the revenue measures, having effectively given up $25 billion to be funded by the securitization of receivables. Most of those measures you can see were very carefully, I would say creatively as well, targeted to very specific demographics of people. You're talking about pensioners, you're talking about persons at the lower end of the economic scale in terms of earnings. And that is really necessitated by the fact that most of our recurrent expenditure is currently at the moment crowded out by wages. Wages now account for about, I think it is 48% of tax revenues. It's 400 and something billion. Tax revenues are around 1 trillion. And so program expenditure now, over the last 3 years, the addition to programmatic expenditure is around 58 billion, whereas for wages it's 200 billion. So you can see the space there is very small. So whatever you're intending to spend on the population, whatever you're intending to give back, if you want the greatest effect, it has to now necessarily reach a very larger subset of persons, even if the benefit is necessarily marginal. You're talking about 25,000 persons are not paying, will not be paying income tax anymore. And even though the benefit, as I said, is marginal, you can classify it as $4,000 per month. But in the wider scheme of things, $50,000 a year can be accumulated to do something else. That is how you have to evaluate the revenue measures at the margin. What is that person that are getting? $20,000 for 600,000 individuals is the $11.5 billion reverse tax credit, and it adds up. It's not. It would be better for it to be like that in terms of equity considerations than if you were to do it the other way around, where 20,000 persons are getting a benefit of 600,000 each.
Okay, so you're saying it's appropriate and it's equitable?
Yes, it's equitable. It attempts to be as far-reaching as possible, and I still believe that there is more room to do more. but the policy direction, fiscal policy direction of the government seems to be taking it incrementally.
Okay. What are your thoughts, Christine?
So I jump in on that point in relation to there is room to do more, and we also need to remember that the budget debate is just beginning.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? We had a presentation today, and we have 2 more to come. There are many different ways that governments can reach persons, and we're used to seeing our Prime Minister in his speech also indicating programmatic changes and other items that could very well be extremely complementary to what has happened, or also target some of the groups who may feel that, oh, I was kind of overlooked. We don't know. We'll hear from him, and then the minister will come back again and close. So I think certainly I don't know that many people would have expected the measures that were put in relation to the pensioners as well as the reverse tax credit. So I think, as Keenan said, there's some amount of innovation, some amount of looking back, a kind of policy log. When last did we look at these people, these categories? And I guess on the flip side, we're so used to some persons being the focus kind of like every year that, it's almost like we're daring the minister to go up a step further or 2 steps or just jump 10. But this shows that there has been some thought about some of the other groups. We talk a lot about vulnerability in Jamaica. And certainly our fixed income persons, you would hear more about low income, but not much about fixed income. And that's an important distinction, because this means, for pensioners, it's not like you can retool and go back and work another 40 years.
Yes.
That option is not really there for you. And so, this look, I think, this policy measure, I think it's certainly something that will have an impact. And hopefully we'll see, the full picture as the budget debate, and hopefully we'll have a sectoral debate that will further elucidate maybe sectoral, specific changes that can enhance or respond to what may arise on the international scene for these sectors.
Okay, so we look forward to hearing from the ministers and the Prime Minister.
Sharnake, there's something I'd like to add.
Yes.
So I noticed that the government doesn't really focus a lot on introducing new revenue measures. Instead, the focus has been on productivity and efficiency. And there are 2 measures that jumped out at me. And the first one is as it relates to online filings below a certain threshold. And I know that we complain a lot about how much time we spend in the tax office. And the introduction of this measure means that once you're below that threshold, you can file from your mobile device. You can file when you're on the beach. So you have that free time to be a little bit more productive. And that's something that's important for us in the long run.
Absolutely.
The other thing that jumped out at me is the removal of the GCT on imported foodstuff.
Fresh food.
Raw food.
On raw food, sorry. Now, for some of us, going to the supermarket and buying something like grapes is a luxury experience, right? You can buy it maybe like once a month, every 3 months. But this measure possibly makes those items more affordable and can allow us to have a healthier, balanced diet. So on the face of it, it may seem that this doesn't have an impact for the Jamaican, but I'm seeing where an emphasis is coming out on greater productivity as well as a healthier lifestyle, which will be beneficial for us.
Very interesting perspective. I don't know if many of us would have thought about, has gone as far to think about that. Thank you for that, Kimaro. I just want to pivot to the wage bill. So Keenan earlier mentioned just I just sit here listening to you and the enormity, just the sheer size of what goes to paying wages.
Yeah.
Now, I just wanted to, just a little bit of stats. At the time when the government started to undertake the compensation restructure, wages to GDP was about 9% of GDP, right, which was in line with the IMF target. I remember those programs, and they were doggedly sticking to that 9%. And I'm seeing now where over the next couple of years, over the medium term, we're set to increase to about 13%, 13.2%. My question is, can a country that is paying 13% of GDP to wages, right, public sector wages, can they do that and drive growth?
Well, you know, there are usually concerns that the wage bill would be unsustainable in the absence of increased productivity. And that's why the minister had pointed to enhanced performance management in the public sector. Now, with the wage bill essentially crowding out other areas of recurrent expenditure, he really highlighted the point that, look, we have to start producing more to kind of, you know, also mitigate inflationary risks. And while now delivering enhanced service to the public sector, which is the whole idea of the restructuring in the first place. Now, with the actual target of wages to GDP, I think we had discontinued or abandoned the whole 9%.
We did.
Yeah, in the Financial Administration and Audit Act. So with that not being a hindrance anymore, whether through our own domestic reform program or through the IMF, we now have that flexibility to allow wages to rise to a certain level, which will eventually go down when the review is complete. But that really is a limiting factor to keep wages at a certain percentage of GDP. So I would not really encourage the public to be necessarily concerned about if wages reach a certain level. You know, it's now about how much value for money are we going to get with these increased wages. And I think the restructuring exercise would have been necessary to ensure greater alignment in terms of job functions, the reclassification exercises among different salary bands and so on. Given that it's such a structural reform, you're not going to really see the benefits now in the next 2 to 3 years or a medium term. This is an investment, I think, for the longer term, right? Because you can't continue to have this inequity and kick the can down the road. You're eventually going to have to address it. I think the government is now trying to do that in a meaningful way.
Great. So, Christine.
I mean, I jump in here just to also put the other side of it. You know, the labor market, we only have one labor market, right? And so, and we also are a country that our borders are open, or people migrate. Our labor market is not, you know, kind of constrained here. Persons have lots of internationally accredited certifications. And so if we want a public sector that's going to deliver, if we're going to go, you know, digital, if we're going to start using AI in our government services to, you know, enhance what we do, then it's not going to be feasible. I hear people talking about on a low-wage economy that there's no way you're going to be able. You may attract initially, you know, maybe somebody has a bond to serve or something. You may have them come, but very quickly they will scale up in terms of exposure, working in government and interfacing and working with these systems. They'll be the catch of anybody who can recruit them in a way. So I guess this is also another kind of push factor to say we have to look at what is it we're paying, how it works. We have to streamline and structure. I mean, in 2007, 8, 9, we were talking about, 240 public bodies. We had to address these issues. Similarly, within the public sector, we had 325 pay scales or bands or whatever it is. So any rational person could agree that that probably is not the most efficient way to operate. And so there are efficiency issues, there are the equity issues, and there are the relativity issues. And so you have to look at it also from that sectoral perspective. We know the numbers with unemployment, and so that shows you that there's a lot more pull from the private sector than may have been in times gone by. So the adjustments are needed, but must be backed, as Keenan is saying, by this improved productivity. How will we use management as a technology, supervision as a technology to generate these additional gains in productivity and output?
Okay, thank you. Keenan, can you speak to any specific initiatives that the government will be pursuing to address the productivity issues?
Well, I do know that there will be a performance management system that is being developed and ought to be completed by 2026. and that would now incorporate several key metrics, performance indicators, and other job description, means of tracking performance and evaluating performance. Because coming out of the review, one of the biggest problems was having multiple job evaluation tools and skills, and that just militated against trying to enhance efficiency and now effectively rewarding people for their performance and not as a means of longevity. And so, we have to move now to that pay for performance. And corollary to the entire review is this system that is being developed since last year. It's going to take 3 years to really be fully operational, but it will coincide as well with the end of the review. So from 2026 going forward, we would expect to see those two things working in tandem.
Great to hear. Now, let us move quickly to infrastructure spending. I understand this is a baby of yours, Christine. Did I hear correctly? One of your babies. Now, we saw where the minister would have spoken to the decline, certainly in the context of COVID, the amount of monies they were able to allocate to infrastructure spending or to capital spending. And this year, 6.2% of the budget. No, and he also spoke about the need to ramp up the public infrastructure investment over the next couple of years, next 5 years, 1 trillion, he said. And I gather that he'll be using alternative modalities to fund it. Could include public-private partnership. And I think back to the toll roads. Is there, I'm wondering, if the government decides to take this route, what would be the cost implications? Especially, I'm thinking about solid waste management, right? How, would this approach be applicable to something like that? And what would it mean for the cost to citizens?
So I think for each area, there may be a better modality than another. I'm not sure how exactly the solid waste management PPP would work, but we know that, as I indicated, from 2007 to 9, when we started thinking about what's the role of the state. I mean, we know the state has roles to play, but how it plays those roles is not the same in every sector or in every single situation. So right now we're trying to be provider and regulator in one entity, which we know, I mean, from a governance perspective, that's just not how you would want to operate. And so in an effort to basically trying to just, what my former boss, Dr. Hughes, would say, just get the basics right, just get it done. We're just going to do this whatever we say we're going to do it and it's done. I think you see the investment beginning now. You see the purchasing of the trucks and the attempts to, have some kind of scheduling. I think there are going to have to be questions, just on that particular example that the country has to answer. What are we going to do about separation at source? What are we doing about our propensity to recycle or reuse or, the other modalities? Everything right now is going on the truck. The last assessment, I think some of my students did, if we were to just take out organic waste, at that time, the number of trucks we had could pull everything else, right? Just by taking that out. And I recall there was even an attempt to have us do the composting at home, and there were, demonstrations as to how to do that. So as far as that's concerned, I think we have a national conversation to have in that regard. I think infrastructure in general is going to be perhaps the thing that maybe makes or breaks our GDP growth discussion, right? I mean, we have a lot of, if you just think about traffic, right? What we're doing right now is forcing everybody to drive on the same roads at the same time. We have no arteries. So,
and it comes back to labor and productivity.
Exactly. We have a road like Cassava Piece, which right now is a major highway. Yes. Right? Yes. A 2-lane road, it is now a highway almost at any point in the day. So there are some questions that we have to also ask ourselves about where we are building houses, which we definitely need to build houses. We know that. That's not the question. vis-a-vis where people live. If you're going to build 4,000 more houses between St. Catherine and Clarendon, you're looking at almost 9,000 more cars coming in to the corporate area. It's not going to happen with the roads we have. People are not going to be happy if you force them to use the roads we have. So these things feed through into the productivity issues and other sentiments about, life in Jamaica. We want Jamaica to be the place of choice to live, work, raise families, do business. That's just not the way to do it. So we're going to have to think about how we're going to redesign the city or provide alternatives within into and out of the corporate area to facilitate the movement of persons throughout the city. So if you think about that one, that's going to be major. I mean, we have to solve these issues as we go forward. And you think if we're still talking logistics hub, then you can see the scale on which the infrastructure development has to be. I mean, you have to have, okay, where's the new city? Because a logistics hub, it's not about people commuting to a logistics hub. That doesn't happen, right? You need a new city around the hub to facilitate whatever it is that's happening there. And then you have, the movements that need to happen, if any, into the rest of the space. So we're not done with the infrastructure story. And this is important. I mean, the private sector needs public sector investment. It's a complementary good to their activity. So if we don't do it, we're going to have more and more bottlenecks that perhaps a few entities will find solutions to and ways to work around. But if you think about an ecosystem for SMEs, etc., they will need these infrastructural developments, hands down, no questions asked. Okay. So that has to happen over the next, at least the plans, somebody has to kind of say, this is what we need, right? For Kingston to and St. Andrew to continue to be the major hub of where economic activity happens.
All right, so I'm going to pivot quickly to social security programs, right? Okay. And I think, given what we would have experienced in the recent pandemic, it really, and the minister spoke about it, just what happens when everything falls away. For some people, it just totally falls away.
Absolutely.
And this is the context in which he spoke about the unemployment insurance that he's thinking about. My quick question for you on that is, given the structure of our economy, the large informal sector, what are your thoughts on that?
So everything for unemployment insurance, I would say, this is a long, kind of like a long run-up to having it happen. And for good reasons, because we know what is happening or could happen with our NIS. We know that, about 10% of Jamaica, the labor force has a pension. So we understand that there are some cultural issues, there are some maybe, perception, mindset issues that don't push us to do this. So if it is that we're going to do unemployment insurance in the same way that we do NIS and the same way that we do pension, then the answer probably is going to be no. It's not going to help the self-employed or the persons who we really want to help. So a lot of the extent to which there will be a major impact from UI is going to depend on, how we're going to sign people up. What is the process? Is it going to be something that is seen as bureaucratic or something that's seen as, too burdensome for me to sign up? I need somebody to verify, or then we're going to have challenges. It's not going to accomplish, that kind of broad scale thing where, okay, we're all home, we can draw down on something. No, it's not. So we have some things to work on. I often tell my students a lot of the things we have to do are not the low-hanging fruit. Now we need to climb the tree. We might find, some rotten fruit up there that we need to prune away. We need to do some more work to kind of get there, because these are now, we have to convince persons that signing up for this is something that was, yes, government may get some of your information that they wouldn't have had before, but in the event of a crisis, you will now be able to participate in a program rather than, kind of trying to figure out how to do it. It's already there. It's an automatic, what we call an automatic stabilizer that you'll just be able to benefit from without any further delay during a crisis.
So you're saying we need a culture shift along with that?
We will have to. And as I said, the administrative part of it, how it is rolled out, is what is going to be critical to know whether or not it's going to be able to support persons or more persons in the event of a crisis. or a shock.
All right, thank you. Let us move quickly now to the medium-term debt strategy. I've heard from Kmara in a while. So, Kmara, you alluded to the fact that there has been a sustained reduction, and the debt trajectory is coming down faster than we had anticipated, which is great news, right? And I just wanted to use that as the backdrop for the next couple of questions, and especially as it relates to how the government plans to proceed in terms of managing the debt over the medium term. And one of the things that they intend to do is to reduce the FX risk, foreign exchange risk in the debt by kind of shifting towards more domestic debt. Do you foresee, and I guess we can all weigh in on this question, what are the implications for the private sector in terms of, from a crowding out standpoint? What are your thoughts?
I don't anticipate much of a crowding out. My understanding is when the Ministry of Finance is coming to market, they do a market read to figure out where institutions, where our investors want to purchase these instruments. In addition to that, there's also an issuance calendar that is shared ahead of time, but they have demonstrated that they have the flexibility to play around with that if needs be. The other thing is we need to consider the fact that the Ministry of Finance has indicated that right now there is a bunching in the debt profile, in that we have major maturities coming up in the next 3 or 4 years. I'm going to contextualize this a little bit. Let's say I go and I purchase a car. I have fixed interest payments. The recommendation is usually not to purchase a car and purchase a house in the same year because you're going to pressure your budget. What the MOF is trying to do in the medium term is to better plan and extend those payments. So what they have indicated is there is a plan to replace the upcoming maturities with longer tenured bonds. So there is a possibility that they will leave the shorter end of the curve, that is anything between 2 to 5 years, to the private sector, to the Bank of Jamaica in terms of their fixed rate issues, and favor the longer end of the curve. So I think there is an opportunity there for everyone to find something that fits their profile.
Yeah. So you would say to the pension fund manager who is uncertain about the forecast or the outlook for interest rates that there will be an opportunity for them to play.
I think so.
Great. I wanted to bring Christine into this conversation if we can. What are your thoughts on in terms of the private sector? How will they fare given what the government plans to do in terms of managing the debt?
Well, I think, I agree with what Kmara is saying. I also think that this is also why in terms of financial market broadening and deepening, you see the other activities happening. What you see happening, for example, the stock exchange, facilitating, the company structures that can move the private sector forward in contrast to what it would have been, 30 years ago. I think these are some of the moves that they're doing to say, okay, everything is not debt, there's equity, there's other things. They're trying to build, the social stock exchange also, because we know that we have quite a few social issues that we need to deal with that need perhaps large sums of investment to facilitate, that kind of nationwide impact, because our communities that are vulnerable are spread right across the country. So it's not a one-off project that's going to do this. You will need sustained interventions. So, and then you have the small business kind of things that are also supporting the DBJs and the various incubators that are coming out to help, persons in different parts of the private sector to be able to get access to financing for various things. So it's trying to build an ecosystem that can support, but of course for the bigger players, the shorter end of the curve will be there in terms of those, the investments. And bear in mind, paying down the debt faster means that some of these other infrastructure things that we need, some of these other, kind of elasticities that we want to have in the other areas or for the other types of beneficiaries, our path, students, you know, and other beneficiaries, there's more room for them faster. And I think that will redound more to the benefit of the wider population rather than just, you know, the private sector per se, you know.
Really appreciate that perspective. You know, of course, you know, we thank you for the robust conversation and just the out-of-the-box thinking. Really, I mean, in terms of what we would have promised our viewers, I think we're really hitting the mark, you know, in terms of just unpacking what the minister would have put forward and just for everybody to see what it means for me. What does it mean for all of us? So thank you for that. Now, viewers, I'm going to ask if you have any questions at this time, you may go ahead and start putting them into the chat, and we'll take them as soon as we are finished with the panel discussion.
Okay.
So moving on, and I think we can just wrap with just looking ahead. What's the macroeconomic outlook? And I know, Kemara, you just spoke at length about, you know, where we were, how we would have recovered, remaining strong relative to the pre-pandemic levels. What do you see are the major risks to Jamaica's growth outlook at this time?
So I would highlight three. The first is the general risks to international growth. We have been seeing all this news about an impending recession in our major source markets. And as I would have indicated earlier, as a tourism-dependent economy, in the event that we see a slowdown in tourism demand, this will have ripple effects across the economy. The other thing I would like to highlight is the risks to inflation. The BOJ has said where they expect inflation to remain outside of the target band until mid-2025. Now, as Dr. Clark likes or has emphasized before, this will have severe negative implication for social framework, especially those with fixed income. And we may see that passing through to the fiscal accounts. The other risk I would like to highlight is, of course, the continued depreciation in the J dollar. Coming out of COVID, we would have gotten used to two-way movements, as in appreciation, depreciation, which is a little bit unusual given our history. But now we're going towards a trend where we're seeing a reversion to that type of one-way movement, which in turn feeds through to inflation. So there's a possibility that we may see inflation a little bit higher for longer, squeezing the consumer's pocket. So the risks I would think of are, as it relates to a slowdown in growth, longer inflation, and a continued depreciation in the J dollar.
Yes, thank you. So, Keenan, what are your thoughts on this?
I think those three risks are definitely the most extant. You could probably as well add the climate-related risks, given our geographical location. And, you know, we have buffers in place for that. The National Natural Disaster Risk Fund and its different multi-layered strategy as well helps to mitigate some of those risks. Of course, you know, the activity of our major trading partners with recessionary risks in, you know, the US, the UK could possibly filter down. Of course, tourism would be a part of that, given the importance of tourism to our economy. And then you talk about, you know, the persistent risk of the tight credit conditions, tight monetary environment with central banks around the world. They're moving still a little skittish, not quite ready to, you know, cut rates right now. So those, I think, are the main risks macroeconomically. But suffice it to say, we do have more buffers now today than we had before. And that is really important in the wider scheme of things.
Thank you. So I'm going to round out this discussion on the macroeconomic outlook with a question to Christine. And I'm going to come back to your baby, Vision 2030. Okay. I know the minister spoke at length about macroeconomic stability and it being a lever for a lot of things that we can do and a lot of things that we're going to do. The Vision 2030, I think it was launched 2009. We are 15 years in. Are we on our way to achieving National Outcome 7, a stable economy?
So I'd say yes, we certainly are. I mean, over, you said the past 15 years, we would have seen significant modernizations in just how we operate, what we're doing, how we think about our fiscal accounts, how we think about the debt. We had to bite the bullet and do 2 debt exchanges. You know, we have done a lot with, you know, central bank independence. There's lots of things you can see that we're doing to indicate to the market that, look, we understand, we're taking, you know, the reins of the horse, we're steering the ship where it ought to be, and we're willing to put in the policy, the legislation, the actual institutions. We now have, you know, our fiscal commissioner. Soon, my department will, you know, be actively looking at the Fiscal Research Institute that the minister has also committed to. So there are, you know, from an institutional perspective, we're doing it, from policy, etc. We also have accomplished, you know, in terms of the numbers that we've spoken about, you know, quite significant changes in terms of our profile on the international market. And the market is responding by, you know, the consequent upgrades. So we're on our way. Now, what I want to make sure is, and I think this is where the impatience of the population comes in, which, you know, fortunately, the politicians will have to be the ones to kind of work on that end. It's not a really technical solution. It really is, how do you manage these expectations? You know, for example, as I said, we're used to seeing these nice big movements in something affecting a PAYE work or something that it almost becomes, you know, okay, so what's the minister going to do this year about the threshold? People are throwing all kinds of numbers out there. What we don't want to do is to start thinking that, okay, we're stable now, so we can now do what we want to do or do anything we want to do. No, the stability is something that is hard won, and the steps must be continued all the way. Even when we, you know, can do $3 trillion worth of capital investment, we still have to work on the stability of the macroeconomy. It's not something you can just let go and say, okay, I'm done. I'm now, you know, doing something else. No, because it is the foundation. Right? You wouldn't want to go and dig up your foundation and think that the house is still going to stand. It's not going to work. But at the same time, you've only just built the foundation. You maybe have some beams going up. You're not going to move into the house, right? There's still lots more work to do. You have, you know, lots of things to tie and put in, and your electricals and all of these things. You may need to go solar. There's a lot of work still left to be done before you can move in and start planting grass and putting up your pagoda on the outside. So we have to just, you know, understand from that perspective. We can't lose track of, you know, we have to do education. Those of us with children know you still have to keep going, right? You can't just wait and say, okay, I'm waiting for that. No. It's still a continuing process of trying to develop. You're almost building the ship while you can't stop sailing, right? You have to make sure that you're keeping those reins as tight as possible. But knowing that there are other investments that have to be done. There's no question about it. But it's about how we're going to find or create the room in which to do that. Yeah. So you have to eat, you have to do everything, but you have to buy a house. Yes. You have to buy a car. So how is it you're going to kind of make it all fit together so that we can achieve the end, as you indicated, a strong macroeconomy, a strong economic infrastructure, and ultimately make Jamaica where we all want to be.
Yes, greatest place on earth to live. Thank you for that. Very interesting perspective, Christine. We're now going to take the questions from our audience, and we have a couple here. I'm going to take the first one from Conrad. And Conrad wants to know whether these tax reduction and other measures are likely to spur inflation. Okay, Mara, you want to take that one?
Or Kina?
So I think the process of monitoring fiscal policy and monetary policy at the same time is a bit like threading a needle, right? It's very precise, it's very exact. And I think that the GOJ and the BOJ have done a very good job. As we pointed out earlier, there is some expectation that inflation will remain elevated. I do not see any immediate risks as it relates to the fiscal profile, that may throw that balance off. I think most of the other risks, or the major risks, are some that Keenan would have highlighted. So he pointed out the possible impact of climate change related risks. So last year we had a very severe drought, which led to very high food prices. Now, even though we haven't seen similar dry weather conditions, I think that is one of the major risks that we would have to pay attention to. What that means is I'm seeing more risks on the macroeconomic side versus the fiscal side. So I don't anticipate any major inflationary risks from the budget.
And just to add to that, so with the government's income tax measures, there's just merely a transfer from, if the government didn't spend that money, the people would spend it and vice versa. I don't think there is such a large aggregate gain of money in the economy where dollars and cents are going to be changing hands too quickly. It's not good. In other words, I want to say it's not going to be demand driven.
Right.
A lot of our inflation now, as we know, food and fuel is largely imported.
Right.
And so it's not because persons don't have this extra money that they're going to go and spend it on consumer goods or consumer expenditure is going to suddenly rise.
No.
I don't think that's going to be the case at all.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. I have a question here from Kevon. Are the infrastructural challenges, rehousing, roadways, etc., factored into the push towards implementation of the performance-based compensation review? Mm-hmm. If not, why not?
I don't get that one.
Understand it?
If I understand the question correctly, I mean, when you're thinking about roads and housing, the productivity challenges, we often speak about productivity in this very narrow conception of the person. Is it that persons are lazy and they can't be bothered? But there's a wider framework within which persons work that is unproductive. If you're sitting 2 hours in traffic and you reach work tired,
Absolutely.
and then the 2 hours going back the other way, that also similarly affects productivity. I can't say that those challenges are really being factored into the assessment framework for public sector productivity. But I do think invariably a good system would make provisions for that, because you want to ensure that there's a holistic look at productivity. It's not just person, it's productivity of the workplace, productivity of management and interactions with workers, and so on and so forth. And, we have had this intractable, long conversation about productivity for decades, that it can't be an individual problem. It must be something that is
that's
systemic, structural, and the only way we can improve it is if we acknowledge that these things add up to the reality.
Absolutely.
Persons are tired when they get to work. Persons don't have the right working environment, occupational and safety and health, and those sort of things. Those are all important.
I think this is where, for example, I mean, it wouldn't be directly, but indirectly, for example, you could be looking at finally saying to ourselves, I mean, lots of us worked from home for 2 years and we were quite productive. So again, I made the comment about management as a technology. Do you really need to see everybody every day at the same time? Do you have persons who are very productive on their own 4 days a week, but they come in to download, offload, whatever it is, connect with the team 1 day a week? I don't know. This is where now management, supervision, how do you need your team to work? Is it really necessary to see me or in face to face, or can we organize ourselves as a team, still make the connections that we need to, as I did during the 2 years. I taught online for 2 years. And many of the students come up and say, oh, miss, you remember we're on, and, they were building behind you or something. You still are making the connection. Yes, it's not the same. And I'm not trying to say that, you is going to be an online school, but I'm just saying we showed that things could still happen and had to still happen. We had to still put out what we could during COVID, and some of us did even more than we had done, the decade prior because of what it meant to think about working remotely. We had to now think, okay, so how am I actually going to do this? How do I block the time to make sure that care duties and everything were done at the same time as making the contribution to the team? So I think that is where perhaps the public, the evaluation system will hopefully push managers to think about, how am I going to structure my team? Do I just take it as it is, or can I innovate in this area and perhaps deliver more results with, a different composition of how we work, when we work, why we work?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So Travis and June, they both have questions on the benefits that the measures outlined by the minister for pensioners. Keenan, would you just unpack that a little bit and just clarify for Travis and June what has the minister said about the measures as it relates to pensioners?
So in a nutshell, really, it works just like the tax threshold. The threshold for pensioners would have moved from 80,000 to 250,000. So the portion of it that is now not subject to income tax would have been increased. And, I think there's a different tier between for those who are 55 and over and those who are 65 and over. But in any case, both of them would have gone up. And, that gives more disposable income. Especially, we see the importance of that for persons who are on fixed incomes.
Absolutely.
It hadn't been moved for 15 years. So it was definitely something that was long overdue. And, it is a good thing that it is happening right now. It is now tripled. You don't really see a tripling of any sort of threshold, right? And that's good. Should be good news for pensioners.
Great, thank you. So I have a question here from Sean, and this is about the credit rating increases. How are the rating increases likely to impact the economy and financial markets, and how can we position our investments accordingly? I'll ask Kmar to do that.
Okay, so a credit rating increase, it depends on which side you're looking at it. I will start by looking at, in the event that the government of Jamaica has to go back to the international capital markets. One thing that we've always seen is an extremely high interest burden. With the credit rating upgrades, it now means that we have more favorable conditions to borrow. It may mean that our interest payments are lower. And again, that will give the government more fiscal space to make the necessary investments. It may also mean that, similar to certain IMF agreements before, we would have gone into like a standby arrangement, but now we have access to a precautionary agreement, which is, again, more favorable financing terms. So as our economic conditions improve, we get these credit ratings, they mean over the long term and maybe immediately a lower debt burden, creating that fiscal space for the government to give back to the people of Jamaica.
Interesting.
Yes, yeah. And might I add, the ability to now pay down on debt, both on time when it's due, as well as in full, are so important for credit worthiness. It means now that in the long run you'll have access to cheaper costs of credit. That filters down into the economy. It filters down into possibly cheaper mortgages, potentially cheaper car loans, and other forms of credit. And so we can see for persons who rely on those forms of financing why that would be a good thing.
Absolutely.
The higher, it's an inverse relationship. The higher you are in your credit ratings, the more likely it is that you're accessing finance on your terms, on better terms. And, we're coming from a very far place. Jamaica almost defaulted, almost junk bond, right, more than 15 years ago. And so those things aren't to be taken very lightly.
Yes, great. Thank you for raising that, because now I think our listeners, our viewers would have a clearer sense as to, because we hear it being spoken about, and sometimes it's up here, very esoteric sometimes, but I think your perspective really brings it home. What does it mean when you go to the bank to borrow, to get a,
more favorable terms?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Great. So I have a question here from, and I think it's a very important question. Travis is asking, are you satisfied with the minister's presentation, given that no mention of education initiatives were mentioned for the 164 billion spend?
Well, I would say that it's hard to really fit that in the minister's presentation. I mean, you expect the minister to elaborate more on the technical details while articulating the overall fiscal policy of the government. So I leave things like the social policy, education, health, poor relief, housing to the Prime Minister's speech. I expect that he would elaborate more on that. And when it comes down to education, a large portion of that budget is really for wages and salaries and for recurrent expenditure. About 2% is capital. And the minister would have elaborated on, if it's capital, building a new school here and there.
Right.
But
it's
very staid and very static in terms of the whole education budget, despite the fact that it does have the largest recurrent expenditure behind finance. So I think judging on the minister's presentation, it would be difficult to really say here or there whether it's good or bad just because it doesn't facilitate an elaboration on education spend.
And remember, as I said, this is just the start.
Yes, absolutely.
The Prime Minister will speak, the Minister of Finance will come back, and we hope we will have a robust sectoral debate where the Minister of Education, I think, it would certainly be expected that you would hear the significant plans that are had. We have had e-talk, their reports, their calls for us to hear more, see more, be able to understand exactly how transformation is going to be done. It's one thing for somebody to say, you need to transform it. I mean, I don't think any Jamaican would be surprised about that. But how? How are you going to actually do it? And I think that's, generally speaking, going to be in the purview of the Minister of Education to elaborate and to present in whatever format. Hopefully as a sectoral debate, but, it could be through town halls or other formats of engagement that the ministry will operationalize.
Sharnake, I think something we're possibly overlooking is the removal of the need for guarantors.
SLB.
Now, that's particularly important for single parents who may not have that type of support system. And with the removal of the need for a guarantor, you're probably creating greater opportunities and access for Jamaicans. So in that regard, I was definitely impressed.
I'm certainly impressed as well. With a child who's almost going off to university, I really was heartened by that policy. I have a question here from Jennifer. And Jennifer wants to know, what's the impact of the removal of GCT on imported raw food, on farmers?
Oh, on farmers?
Yes.
Okay. I will definitely take this one. So under one of Jamaica's trade agreements, we are mandated to encourage trade without certain restrictions. And I understand the concern for farmers, but I think the type of produce that we have is so unique in a sense, in terms of it's competitive. And I believe that farmers are in a good position to compete from a pricing perspective. But I definitely understand the concern. I know it came up in the budget debate earlier this afternoon that there are some concerns about farmers. So, yeah, so in here I will hand over to Keenan, because I think he may be in the best position to answer this question.
Yes.
So, you know, the WTO would have mandated that Jamaica can't really have such differential trade regimes when it comes on to GCT. So things like duties and other fees will remain. And so it's not a case where, you know, people tend to look at it in the scope of competitiveness. And yes, they are now on equal footing where GCT is concerned. But when, and it appears that it's a policy that's generally geared towards consumers rather than producers. Persons are saying, oh, you know, you're going to have the farmers having to put up with the quality of goods coming in now, making it easier. And that may not necessarily be the case. You know, given persons' consumption patterns as well, it really, it's not a one-to-one relationship that you can say it's in stone just because you remove GCT. No, it's going to automatically and inexorably affect the local farmers. It does depend a lot on our taste habits, and for particular goods, specific goods, right? The consumption patterns might be very different. And so I think that is the lens that you really have to look at it from a trade-based perspective. The relationship, I think, is not really one-to-one.
Yeah. I think agriculture, agriculture is one of those sectors that needs a lot of focus in terms of how we produce. We've long been talking about the fact that we need to move towards more protected agriculture in terms of we're not planting, in these wide open fields that are probably not irrigated enough, not properly drained. And so if it's either rain or sun, there's a problem. No, we can't continue that way. Now, to transition, maybe a different skill set, maybe technology, and maybe a lot more investment. Again, a lot of this is going to have to come through some kind of mechanism, perhaps initiated in the first step by government, and then the private sector may engage. But again, this is where the need for the fiscal space and, what are the policies, the programs that the Ministry of Agriculture can now initiate, or maybe will have been trying to do, but now the farmers will now see, listen, we better get into this, let's get the RADA people here, let's figure it all out and just get it done, maybe once and for all. We'll get that done. But agriculture, when you look at the quarterly GDP numbers, when we're down, we're down. When we're up, so it's very important, and I don't think it would make sense for the government. So we have to do this on this end. There must be countervailing measures in terms of the investment into the productivity in agriculture and the production. I think you will hear something about that, hopefully in the sectoral debate at least.
And also resilience.
Well, certainly. This is why the protective thing, is an issue, that whether it's hydroponics or, whatever the other modalities will be, you don't need to plant in wide open fields to get large yield.
Yes.
I think that's well known. It's just how to transition from our current practices to those that will help us to be more efficient, more productive in agriculture and competitive.
Certainly, the theme of productivity stretches across all of the sectors and all quarters. Our final question I'm going to take from Wesley. And I'm going to ask Christine to take this one because she made some points I think are related earlier in the discussion. Please elaborate more on increasing the maximum participating voting share capital on the Junior Stock Exchange from 500 million to 700 million for small and medium size. I think what he wants to know, does the 10-year tax break still exist?
I don't recall whether or not that was spoken to. I don't know if Keenan can help me in terms of that 10-year tax break.
I don't recall any change being made to that.
No.
From what I recall, it was just the increase really in the limit to 750 for new.
For new, not existing.
Right. No, it wouldn't apply to existing.
Right.
Usually it's because you're trying to, again, as I said, induce persons to engage with that form of financing rather than, trying to kind of do it on their own or something like that. So it's trying to attract new. It's not, about the 10 years as far as I know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any final thoughts before we wrap? Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers?
One of the things that I really wanted us to focus on is the fact that the budget, in terms of its measures, did a lot to ease bottlenecks. So it was a first step in addressing the structural issues that we face. And, it's not a particularly glowing topic, but things like procurement, which affects the recurrent side, it affects the capital side. You had to make supplementary budgets to take back the funding to the consolidated fund. And that is so important. If you want to translate macro to micro, you think about overall policy down to programs and projects. Things that affect programs and projects, procurement, implementation, staffing, human resource, and making those things easier, you're going to see those things happening on the road. You know, if I don't see the garbage trucks come, if I don't see the buses coming, I'm going to be upset with members of the political directorate. But if I now put that framework in place to have those things executed in the most seamless manner, in the manner that is path of least resistance, then you're going to see a faster translation between what the government says as macro policy and what's going to happen on the ground in terms of micro projects and programs.
Thank you, Keenan.
Okay, so for me, I am very excited to see where we go over the next 12 months, which is right back where we started. I believe the institutional factors are in place, and I'm excited to see what the fiscal accounts yield.
Yes, and I would just say that as we hold on to the stability that we've been able to develop, to accrue, and put in place, you know, the other measures, take it a step further or 10 steps further, we will be able to see and take on more and more public sector spending, public sector investment, and we'll see, you know, more gains from even the debt reduction, as is indicated. I mean, you know, if you're saving 1% of $1 trillion, that's a lot of money that you'd have had to pay out. So it matters if it's even 1%. So we will need as a population to have a little bit more patience while doing the things we must do and holding everybody else, all our other stakeholders to account for the things they must do also. There are some things that we just cannot do for ourselves. We cannot run our own JUTC, for example, right? So we need government, we need a state to, whether it's a regulator to provide it or to commission somebody to provide it. So we have to do our part. We also have to hold those in account who should be also doing their part. And that is how we'll move forward as a society and create the Jamaica that we want to see over the next 5 to 10 years to 2030.
Thank you so much, Christine, Kemaro, Keenan, for helping us to distill some of those key points coming out of the budget and what it really means for us, the businesses and the everyday citizens. And thank you, our audience, for contributing to the conversation with your questions that also provoked thought and added to the robust discussion. Thank you for joining Let's Talk Budget. For those persons who want to review this webinar, it will be available on our Instagram and YouTube platforms. See you soon.
We are the wealth generation.
We're full of life.
Full of vibes.
And we have a lot of ambition. We don't speak of lack.
Nah, forget about that.
We know the life that we want, and we're not afraid to go after it.
Even if we have to build it from scratch.
Life looks different now. This generation does things our way.
We are the wealth generation.
And Scotia Investments, they get that.
Start your wealth building journey today with a lower opening amount in a mutual fund or unit trust product and more affordable contributions.